you want me to, do you want to pull the funding item off the consent agenda to talk about those things, or do you want me to just?
Just mention it at the end of your report.
Oh, mention it at the end of the month.
Related to the funding item was on consent. There are any additional.
So yeah, just to make sure they got that, that's the Kaboom, the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. Kaboom's Play 16.
Ms. Musini, are you going to sit at the dais?
Come on, Riff, run this thing. There you go. Come on, man.
I don't think there's any concerns about a quorum today. This is the regular meeting of the Technical Coordinating Committee. And the first order of business is introductions, please.
Jeremy Lokirko, City of Walnut Creek and Transpac rep.
Heather Ballinger, City of Walnut Creek and City County Engineers rep.
Yvette Ortiz, WICTAC and City of El Cerrito.
Ahmed Abwali, City of Antioch, Transplant.
Chad Smalley, City of Richmond, WICTAC.
Barbara Hawkins, City of San Pablo, WICTAC.
Ann Musini, County Connection.
Tom Horea, Stride Delta Transit.
Jim Conradi, AC Transit.
Andy Diller, Town of Danville, SWAT.
Michael Tanner, BART.
Lisa Barbadilla, City of Santa Maria, SWAT.
Steve Kersavan, City of Brentwood.
Dina El Nicole, Caltrans.
John Cunningham, Contra Costa County.
Tony Cole, Lafayette, SWAT.
Thank you. Next item of business is public comment. I don't have any cards. Is there anyone that wishes to speak? Seeing none, we'll move on. There is a summary of actions from the last meeting in the handout, and we seek approval. Any comments?
Move approval.
Motion carries. There's also an attendance log in the handout. They've asked us to approve it. Anyone object? Well, somebody moved.
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. It's approved as well. On to the quarterly status report. They would also seek approval. Is it, Isham, there's nobody that wants to speak to it? The quarterly status report, project status report. I'm sorry? Yes, I realize that. But I didn't know if anybody wanted to say anything about it. So, okay, somebody approve. Make a motion.
So move.
Yes. The entire consent calendar is approved. Takes us on the regular agenda items today, of which we have two. The first is project monitoring.
Good afternoon. My name is Walt Allen. I'm with Parsons, helping out CCTA. You have before you the project monitoring report. This gives you information about STIP projects, OBAG projects, and inactive obligations. We're coming down to the wire in terms of the deadline to get our OBAG projects submitted for the request for authorization. So there's a list here of all the jurisdictions and all the projects that are programmed for 16 and 17. So we're looking at those 16 projects. Everybody looks pretty good. We're moving ahead with everything. So I'm going to congratulate those folks of you who submitted your requests and anticipating getting those in the next couple of weeks. Also in the STIP report, just want to mention that there are a couple of projects that are getting close to the wire here, so you want to pay particular attention to that for those of you who are interested in those situations. Finally, the inactive projects, they're very few, and they're all in future. They're not currently inactive, but they're all need some attention. So those of you who have those projects on this list, I want to make sure you also pay attention to that. In addition, I'd like to just make a couple of comments about some funding opportunities that relate to the item that was on that consent agenda. One is the TDA Article 3 call for projects is going to be issued sometime next week. So those of you who have TDA Article 3 projects, just pay attention to that. There'll be some sort of email that will be sent out. In addition, there is a PTAP 17 call for project. That's the Pavement Management Technical Assistance Program. That's cycle number 17, and those applications are due October 30th. So that's something coming up very soon. And last but not least is a time-sensitive funding opportunity that is connected with it looks like it's the upcoming Super Bowl. So there's an organization called kaboom.org, and they're providing grants up to $150,000 with a maximum of $50,000 per site to benefit physical projects that promote kids' play in everyday spaces such as sidewalks, bus stops, and parks. A total of $750,000 is available in the Bay Area. So with that, I'll end my report and just ask if there are any questions or any comments. All right, thank you.
And now the most important agenda item of the day. Go ahead, Martin.
You're not going to introduce the item.
Oh, Martin Engelman from CCTA.
No, I mean the item, not me.
Oh, item 5. Review. I thought you said not going to introduce me.
No.
Not only is my sight bad, my hearing's getting bad.
No,
what can I say?
It's fine.
Review of the proposed modeling approach for the 2014 countywide transportation plan and the draft subsequent environmental impact report.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, TCC members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and here to present to you some information regarding the modeling approach for our countywide transportation plan. I want to recognize two people in the audience. First, Matt Kelly is our Associate Transportation Planner, and he generally handles the modeling and would normally be doing this presentation, but somehow he disappeared for a few weeks and started eating a lot of pasta and drinking Italian wine and came back, and so I'm covering for him. And also want to recognize Kevin Johnson from Fair and Piers. Kevin. And Kevin is the one who has been staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning over at Fair and Piers, running this Transcat model and doing all the post-processing and things. So, and I'm just the end user here, talking about inputs and looking at outputs. So we have an opportunity to model 3 alternatives for the countywide plan. We've developed these alternatives A, B, and C, just a quick description. Alternative A is an investment primarily in transit capital. Alternative B is kind of a mix of roadways and transit capital. And then alternative C is essentially a program alternative. There's also going to be an alternative D further down the road, which will be the draft transportation expenditure plan that the authority releases tentatively for November, this coming November. And we plan to evaluate that as well. We're on schedule to issue a draft subsequent EIR in January of 2016, and that'll be along with our draft countywide plan. It's still called the 2014 countywide plan. We don't know if we're going to change it to 2016, but we may well do that. And in order to get the analysis done by January, we have to really, get on the modeling now and nail down all the assumptions and move forward. And once we've done that, it's hard to go back and change the assumptions. So we're really here today to run by you how we're approaching this whole thing and see if you have any comments or questions or concerns about our approach. You do have a subcommittee called the Technical Modeling Working Group, and it is comprised of transportation planners and engineers from around the county and folks from MTC and Caltrans. I will say the number of modeling geeks in the county has kind of been dwindling. There used to be many of them, and they're becoming fewer and farther between. I'm not sure why that's happening, but we did have a good group meeting on October 5th. We had Winston Rhodes, Phil Cox from Caltrans, Rafat Ray, Paul Reinders showed up. So we had 4 folks, and then staffing it was myself and Julie Morgan from Fair and Piers and Kevin Johnson. And we went over the memo that is in your packet. It was in a slightly different form at the time. And we discussed each of the assumptions. And what you have on page 5.3 of your packet is a summary of what the Technical Modeling Working Group thinks we should move forward with. And there's a memo from them to you. And if you approve this, then we would send this memo forward to the authority in October and just tell them that we're moving forward with the modeling, and here are the assumptions. So as most of you know, we have a model that is consistent with MTC's model, that is consistent with ABAG's traffic demographic forecasts. It runs on the TransCAD software. It's the 9-county Bay Region model. We start with MTC's model, and then we add detail for Contra Costa and parts of the Tri-Valley. And we have this thing now has more than 3,000 zones. And if you figure an origin-destination table with 3,000 zones or 3,000 rows and 3,000 columns, that's 9 million cells in each of the spreadsheets when you look at the origin-destination matrix for this thing. So it's a big model, but it's been running smoothly, and we've been able to apply it. So I just want to go through this memo and brief you on how we are approaching the different scenarios. Again, each of these scenarios reflect kind of different emphases or focus on different modes or programs versus projects. And we're also keeping the investment level at $10.3 billion, which assumes we have $3.4 billion from the RTP. That's a given for the 2013 RTP, and all the projects of the RTP are in there. And then we get an additional $2.3 billion from a new measure, assuming we have a half-cent sales tax over the next 25 years. And then we assume a 2-to-1 leverage. So the 2.3, we get another 4.6, total 6.9 plus 3.4, $10.3 billion is our budget estimate. So each of these represent $10.3 billion in investments, a mix of projects and programs, and we're refining those definitions at this point and what goes into them. But we want to get going on the modeling. So the model's really good at predicting how traffic will go if we change the street system, the highway system, especially the freeway system. And so if we know what the street improvements are, we can just code the model network, and the model network will respond. So, for example, in the case of the State Route 4 operational improvements on I-680, or between I-680 and 242 and points east, we can add auxiliary lanes or model extended HOV lanes or through freeway lanes. Just code that into the model, and then it gives us essentially the impact of that on traffic. Transit and transit projects and programs are a little more difficult. For one thing, the improvements are not well defined. We do know about the EBART extension from Antioch to Brentwood, and that's a surefire project that we can code into the model specifically and see how the ridership is on that. But if we're talking about, for example, the I-680 transit investments or the I-80 transit investments, we don't quite know what they are yet, whether, the kind of mode that they're going to be and what changes are required. And it's also very time-consuming to code the transit network. So we want to reflect what's going on in terms of investment. Some of these are on a broad geographic area, and so rather than recode everything, what we're proposing to do is take the existing transit network for the different bus operators, and what we would do is increase the frequency of service, and that can be easily done without too much time coding. We do have cost estimates from the operators on what it would take to have 15-minute frequencies, and the estimates they gave us was $75 million in capital and $38 million in operations cost, and that corresponds to the level of investment for option A, which is a heavy capital transit investment program. And so for option A, we are going to use 15-minute headways for all the operators. That's a dramatic improvement over what there is out there today. Options B and C have lower investments in transit, and so we would use a lower frequency or a longer headway for those, but the 15 minutes would be the max. And then for BART, BART's already running at 15 minutes, so we probably, if there's a significant BART investment, we'd go to a 10-minute frequency on BART to reflect improved service there if there's a significant investment in BART. Next area going through the memo, if you're following along, is integrated corridor management projects. And on I-80 and the Smart Corridor in East County, we originally used 8% as a modeling assumption. We haven't actually seen that in real life, and so looking at actual numbers and not having the I-80 ICM up and running yet, we do have data from DOT in Oregon, and they show a 5% increase in capacity for ICM, so we're proposing to use a maximum of 5% for ICM. And there was some back and forth at the modeling committee. Some of the members thought that 5% was too low and we should go for 10%, and it's also discussion about how the future of automated vehicles will improve this, but we really don't have any sound information on that, and so we're being fairly conservative in saying the maximum ICM would get 5%, and the alternatives that have less investment would get a lower percentage increase in freeway throughput. The next area of analysis is called active transportation modes, and that's our bicycle and pedestrian activities. We have data from Smart Growth America indicating that improvements and investments in transportation for livable communities and bike-fed sidewalks and trails can increase bicycle usership by 20 to 50%, and pedestrian levels can increase by 5 to 20%. Also information from the Air Pollution Control Officers Association indicating reductions in VMT for active modes and increased walkabilities. And putting all this information together, what we think is a reasonable estimate for the investments, and this is how Measure J, if renewed, would affect the transportation system. We're suggesting a maximum of a 2% reduction in auto travel, and that would be limited to the trips that are 5 miles or less, because this isn't going to affect 30-mile trips. It's going to affect your shorter trips. And that's the recommendation on active transportation modes. Maintenance and repair, a little bit difficult to model. Not sure how to model it. So we call it non-modelable and won't be able to do anything on that. We will be reporting out a number of system-wide performance measures, and these will be used in the EIR and in the CTP. They include vehicle miles traveled per capita, vehicle hours traveled per capita, vehicle hours of delay. We can get average speed on freeways and arterials. We can get mode share. We can get total transit trips, and we can get time spent walking per person. So we will be generating all of that information for each of the alternatives. Finally, there's the equity analysis, and we're trying to determine if there are any adverse impacts to communities of concern. And we will be able to report all of these performance measures by geographic subset, and we know the income levels at the traffic analysis zone level, and so we'll be able to evaluate things like job accessibility through certain length trips for certain communities and generate an equity analysis through that data. So that's our approach, and we'd like to move forward with the analysis. We're looking for your concurrence, and if you have any comments or concerns, now's the time to tell us about them.
Just a couple of questions. One, just process. There's a CTP working group referred to in the memo. I don't know if that's a CCTA group or if that's a staff group. And then another content question. You talked about revenues available via leverage. When we're talking about additional monies being available as a result of a new sales tax measure, does those assumptions reflect your current leverage record, or is there some consideration for diminishing returns with a new sales tax measure?
I'll answer the first question. I'll answer the second question first. How about that? So leveraging. We are using kind of our past experience on leveraging, but being conservative on projects. We've been very lucky, and also we've had very aggressive management here seeking money from all sources, and they've been very successful at this. So we have gotten 3-to-1 leveraging and more on projects. On programs, it's probably a little more difficult to say what the leveraging is. Is it 0-to-1 because we're just putting a program out there, and the bus operations would be there whether we put 5% into buses or not. So the question is it leverage 0-to-1 or is it leverage 20-to-1, depending on what percentage our programs make up. But we do think historically there has been some leveraging success in programs, and where the programs are collections of smaller projects, we've leveraged at 1-to-1 or better, 1.2, 1.5 to 1. And so for the purpose of this analysis, we've just assumed across the board for projects and programs, irrespective of the mix, a 2-to-1 leverage. And we think that's fairly conservative. It does reflect the diminishing returns on the projects. And then the second question, I'm sorry, there's a CTP work group in your...
Yeah, in the memo, they refer to a CTP work group, and I haven't seen that. I know there's a CTP master plan or working group, but we haven't met in a while. And so this CTP working group, what entity is that? Is it a...
What page are you on?
Second. Members of the CTP team, under the background, first page of the Fair and Peers memo.
Oh, the CTP team, yes. Yeah, so I think that's referring to authority staff and consultants. And we probably need to explain who that is. But that's not a working group of staff. That's actually more an internal group. And we can certainly clarify that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have 3 questions. The first one is, if the county's not successful in getting the tax measure to pass, will there be a modification to the model?
So the question is, if we don't have, well, we might not go to the ballot. I mean, we're doing this a step at a time. But we are going to evaluate the investment options in the CTP. I think that's a go. So we have a scenario in there that reflects, the no build, so to speak. In fact, there's a no build, and then there's a build with existing Measure J, and we'll carry those forward, and the analysis will be there. If you want to see what's it like if the measure doesn't pass, you can see that. And then if, what we're trying to do really is prioritize projects. And so irrespective of whether we go to the ballot or not, the hope is that we will have a list of prioritized projects by May of 2016. And one of the criticisms of the first version of this plan, which we released in August of 2014, was you've just got this $12.4 billion list of projects out there and you're evaluating that, but is it really realistic to say that you're going to do all that? And so we're doing a financially constrained list of projects, and those will become our priorities, and we can use those to advocate for other funding sources should the sales tax not be pursued or not pass.
Thank you. The second question is, option A is a heavy investment in transit, and I'm wondering, are you using AC Transit's SEP to base your modeling, or is it just more generic and just a lump sum amount of dollars and not necessarily based on any specific route or any specific capital investment?
So option A is the transit investment, and it reflects if all of the transit agencies in the county were to go to 15-minute headways, and it reflects the capital and operational investment for that.
So it looks at the existing routes now, not any modifications.
Well, we don't know. It could involve a complete remake of the routes.
Okay.
We don't know where the routes are going to be or what they're going to look like, and probably by 2040 they're not going to look the way they look today. So that's an open question.
Okay. And the third question is, you're using vehicle miles traveled, and so a lot of local agencies still use levels of service to evaluate any kind of impacts. how will this vehicle miles travel model be able to, will it impact any local agencies' models or reports that use levels of service that may be needed for capital improvements, determining capital improvements on local areas?
Well, boy, am I glad to hear that question, because usually we hear, hey, how come you're doing level of service and not vehicle miles traveled? And so SB, you know about SB 743 and the push to eliminate LOS as a measure. But we do have in the countywide plan the action plans, and the action plans for all 5 regions include measures of level of service and delay. And so we will continue to evaluate those, and you will get results on the LOS impacts.
Thank you.
So 2 questions. How do you determine the frequency or the routing of, for instance, regional express buses in the model? Second, just a comment. So the 15-minute headways throughout the system seems like a reasonable assumption, but it also seems like you might be missing opportunities. Like if you, for instance, tested some of the best routes with 5-minute frequency, and if you see if your ridership keeps climbing and climbing, that might be an indication that that's a good place to invest. So it's sort of, I guess it depends. It's not a bad assumption, but I think you might miss some good opportunities by just using the 15-minute assumption.
So thank you for the question, Jim. We're not all that sophisticated, and it's kind of a I'd say 100,000-foot level model at this point. It's not really an operational model, and so the route system is based on what's out there today, and that's what you get. We're not adding routes for the future, though there are certainly opportunities there, but whatever's out there, that's what we coded. And I don't think we've made any changes to that. We hope, if there are opportunities on individual routes, certainly those will be explored as we talk about investing the new dollars into various routes. We've always said that the Measure J funds will not be an injection of funds into overall transit operations, that they'll be aimed at specific routes. And we've had to waver from that a little bit given the Great Recession and the lack of funding and the cutting of the routes. But certainly if we assume that there's a better financial environment, funding environment for transit, and we can focus on specific routes, those would be the opportunity routes that we focus on. But that's a whole other study. We're hoping to capture it just in general by doing 15 minutes across the board.
Other questions?
Yeah, just like further on the transit. When we put our ask in for the expenditure plan to the subregions, we defined kind of a 15-minute frequency on service to BART, which isn't the same as 15-minute frequency on our entire system. And I wonder if this is the transit operator's ask, which has been couched and kind of clothed in this 15-minute frequency to BART, or is this like really taking the entire system up to 15-minute frequency?
I'm going to have to ask Kevin that one.
Yeah, we're doing any route.
So, rightly or wrongly, we're doing every route.
Okay.
Just to see what it does, and we haven't singled out the BART routes. And my understanding
it's not based on our ask for the expenditure plan, I guess, is also the point.
Well,
it'll be more
loosely
expensive.
Based.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to be, option A is more expensive than your ask, I think.
Okay.
Martin, since you have a bevy of transit operators up here, I'll weigh in as well. somewhat in your defense, by the way. Given the parameters, I probably would have done the same thing. 15-minute headways are sort of the holy grail of transit operations these days. It's considered the minimum level to attract and retain ridership. And for something this size, just doing it overall based on what exists is probably a very good swag. And I have this vague recollection, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we got asked about potential cost if we did that. It was a while ago. I thought we had a discussion or something, but maybe I'm wrong. Because we would have just swagged based on what our current service is and operational cost and what the increased frequency would be.
I believe it was during the call for projects earlier this year that we basically just asked. I don't think it was specifically for 15-minute frequencies. I think it was just, in terms of trying to remember what are your operating and maintenance costs for running particular services. And I think it was actually for the CMP call for projects, so it wasn't necessarily related to the TEP or the EIR. So it was a little bit different.
Well, it could be, and that's why I just had a vague recollection of having this discussion.
Yeah, I know we did have that discussion for the CMP capital improvement program.
The other thing I would add, Martin, you mentioned that it was easy in option A in the model to increase service for transit. And I'd only say it's a lot easier in a model than it is in reality. So if things go well and this comes to fruition, we'll probably need your help because it's going to be a lot harder to actually put into place. Other questions?
I had a question about the active transportation programs and the reduction that you're assuming in mode shift from cars to other modes. Did you consider also just that improving the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure also encourages the use of transit in that kind of 2% reduction?
I think it's primarily the effect on the pedestrian and walk trips, and then we will capture the increased transit through the improved frequency, and that kind of gets picked up there. But I don't think we included the transit effect in the active transportation. I think they're two separate things. Because to include the transit effect, we would have to consider trips longer than 5 miles, because a lot of transit trips are more than that. So we've kind of split them.
Oh, Tony.
Yeah, Martin, just want to ask you a question that was on the minds of several of us at the SWAT TAC level when Matt Kelly came and talked to us about this topic. Has to do with the logistics of integrating option D, which is the TEP, into the model and the EIR. So I think you said earlier that the authority is going to issue a draft in November. And I think it's your goal to get the EIR and the modeling done by January. So I'm just wondering how the timing of those two work together, and if for whatever reason the draft, at what point do you have to start modeling the TEP, and would that give you enough time, given the fact that whatever draft the authority issue is going to have to go through some sort of a circulation?
Yeah, we have a scheduling issue there, and it's a crunch issue as well for the consultants. And what we propose to do is we've got the definitions of A, B, and C pretty well laid out, and we're asking the consultants to proceed with the full analysis of A, B, and C now. And then in November, when we get alternative D, they will have cleared the deck, so to speak, and they'll have already turned the crank 3 times, so they'll be pretty good at this. And they are telling me that they can turn it around between mid-November, work through the holidays, get it documented into the draft reports for January, on the condition that we can get this A, B, and C stuff out of the way now. So it is a crunch, and it is a risk, but we do have a plan to accomplish it.
So can I ask a follow-up question? So if, say, the circulation of the draft plan comes back and then some substantial changes are made to the plan, does that then throw a real big monkey wrench into the model work that you would have done by then, between November and January?
Well, it depends what the change is. So we will have a draft in January that'll reflect the draft TEP, and then concurrently the authority will release the final draft TEP in January. That won't be the same as the November draft. So we'll have an EIR out there circulating with the draft, and we'll have discussion about the final draft. We don't know how different those will be. And then another change could occur in May when the authority adopts the final TEP. We'll be working off the draft final from January, and so if there's another change in May, then we might have to do an addendum to the EIR, which is what we had to do back in 2003 when we did this last time for the 2004 Measure J. We had to do an addendum. All of the projects in the world are supposedly in our comprehensive transportation project list, and A, B, and C, and D cover all those. So it's only if the final TEP includes a really big project that is nowhere to be seen right now and nowhere to be seen in our CTPL that we would have then a major problem. And we'd be looking at possible recirculation of the EIR, which would throw off the whole schedule. So, but we're not expecting any new really big projects to come along that we don't know about already.
No more questions?
I have one. So Martin, then with that said, so EPAC, my understanding then, EPAC is putting together this preliminary package, which we're going to be calling option D. Are they close to finalizing that in November, so then it goes to the authority in December for final review and approval? Is that the timing?
Well, their EPAC is supposed to provide input for the draft in November, and then they're going to comment on the draft in December, and that's their role. They are working on a proposal, but we don't know if they'll be successful in developing it in time for the draft. We have a couple of more meetings, I think, before the November authority meeting. They're talking about adding a third one, I believe, if they need it. The November draft is not the same as the EPAC proposal. The November draft is going to be developed by the authority based upon input from the RTPCs, EPAC, and other stakeholders.
Okay, if there's no more questions, CCTA staff has asked that we approve this proposed approach for the travel demand forecasting model, along with post-processing of the model outputs for analysis of certain programs. Do we have a motion?
So move.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Before we adjourn, I would like to thank CCTA staff, and the specific people are not here, but last meeting they asked that we were more careful about identifying who speaks, and I requested that we have name placards made, and they did it in one meeting. They're there. So on your way out, everybody put theirs back so they're available for next time, because it works well and helps us all. Thanks. See you all November 19th. Same place, same time.